Because what you, the unsung heroes in the wastewater industry, do matters. Join me, Suzan Chin-Taylor, the DooDoo Diva, a longtime veteran of the wastewater, trenchless, and civil infrastructure industry each week as I deliver industry know-how from industry pros who know how. Whether you want to learn about the latest trends in technology, training and retaining great talent, sales and marketing, leadership and growth, or simply how to be more efficient, productive, or profitable, this podcast is for you. Let's dive in.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the DooDoo Diva Smells Like Money podcast. We are continuing our wonderful visit with Dr. Sam Ariaratnam, who is a professor at ASU, and I have to look at my notes here because this is a mouthful. He is the Sun State Chair of Construction Management and Engineering. And many of you in the industry will know him as a pioneer and a champion for the world of trenchless technology. And so welcome to the show, Dr. Sam.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we're continuing our conversation we left off last time about dealing with the issues of our aging buried infrastructure and having to have a good asset management plan and looking at all the tools in the toolbox, which include trenchless technology. And you had shared with me before we came on the show that we really have three choices. We can do something new, we can replace what is there, or we can choose to rehabilitate it. And so knowing all of that, I would like you to share with us your experience and your observations as being a pioneer in this space of trenchless technology, what you see as having been successfully adopted. What do you see coming down the pike that we should be watching for and really thinking about utilizing because so many advancements have been made? And you also made we could start out because we did some medical analogies on our last episode, and continuing in that theme, in that vein, is kind of comparing surgery or things for the heart with trenchless technology. And with that, I'm just going to leave that wide open for you because you're a great storyteller of taking us down this path.
Certainly. When we look at trenchless technologies and you're trying to talk to the average person about what is it? What is trenchless? And these are technologies that are capable of installing new infrastructure, buried infrastructure, or rehabilitating existing infrastructure with minimal impact to surface activities. And so the analogy of it is that when we look at our traditional way of doing things with open cut construction, which we've seen for decades, right? And open cut really is like open heart surgery, right? Where you cut open the patient, cut open the road, do whatever the repair is. And then it takes a long time to get the system back up and running at full capacity because of that. Whereas, the patient, isn't going home that day or the next day. They're there for a while. And trenchless methods are more like angioplasty, right? And that's a big advancement in the medical field. We don't have to do in many cases, we don't have to do open heart surgery. We can use angioplasty where we have probes with cameras that go in and check out the artery. And then if we have to put a stent in, which would be like a liner system in trenchless, right? For the repair, come out. And then the patient is up and running in a day. Right. And so it's just minimal impact. There's no scarring or anything like that. Much like with the trenchless process, there's no big, pavement that's missing, very minimal, if at all any pavement would be missing on one of those situations like that. Because when we're looking at a rehabilitation system, we typically just go from a manhole to a manhole, or in a case of a water line, a valve to a valve. So we're not actually digging anything in the road for that type of situation. And so it becomes very efficient. And so as a municipality, you can do a lot of work in a short period of time by utilizing trenchless methods compared to, say, a traditional open cut, where, once you've got to excavate it, then you've got to take out the material, put backfill, put the new line in, cover it up, compact it, and then repave it. You're not doing any of that stuff typically with a trenchless method. And so when we're doing a rehabilitation, so that really saves a lot of time. So it's kind of that angioplasty analogy.
Right. So in the world of trenchless, let's review some of these. Like, what have you seen getting adopted more and more as a really solid problem solver? And where do you see technology going? Because something that I've just noticed that as we have more and more problems cropping up and the budgets are shrinking, it's almost forcing the technology providers to get more innovative and come up with more and more solutions that can be deployed for less cost.
Absolutely. And you see I go to a lot of conferences, a lot of trade shows all over the country and all over the world, and you see the new technologies and the innovation that's been done in the industry. And I think there's a lot in materials, right? And so a lot of the new materials, the lining materials that they have are very innovative for repairing water and sewer systems, right? We've always had things, in the sewer space, but now the water space is really coming along very, very strongly in terms of those applications. And if you look at what's happening globally too, is, we looked at, for example, a place like China, which I travel to a lot to look at their infrastructure and do a lot of lectures and engagements related to buried infrastructure and trenchless technologies. They were building all these new lines, but now they've realized that they have a lot of lines there that have to be rehabilitated. So the rehabilitation market is huge in China. And that's similar to what we have here in North America. We have a huge rehabilitation market. We are building a lot of new infrastructure, but we have a lot of aging infrastructure all over the country and all over North America that need to be addressed. And so we're seeing a lot of adoption of trenchless technologies by municipalities. It's kind of second nature now to a lot of them. And that's taken a long time from the education perspective to get people comfortable about trenchless. But it's good to see that more and more municipal people are going to different conferences and learning about it. I'm involved in a couple of really big organizations. One is the North American Society for Trenchless Technologies. There's the American Society of Civil Engineers. And both of them, the pipeline group, the pipeline conference, which really focuses on water and wastewater. I was just at that conference 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago in Calgary, and the No Dig show, which was in Rhode Island this past year, and will be in Denver next year. Both of those organizations, associations, offer municipal scholarships. So that allows government, municipal people the ability to travel because they don't have those budgets to go to these shows. But you really want them to come and learn about the technology so they can adopt it. So it's a win-win for everybody, right? So by both of these organizations offering these scholarships, they're bringing 100+ municipal personnel to each one of their shows. And it's a wonderful thing because now you've got these municipal people that are coming, they're listening to presentations, they're talking to the various companies that are in the exhibition hall about the different products, and kind of the light bulb goes off in terms of the applications that are applicable to their particular systems.
And one of the things that, with any new technology, a lot of times, these newer technologies might appear to be, oh, wow, that's so much more expensive than some of the other things that I've been using. But I think we need to look at one. I spoke to someone on the show a while back about the importance of having ASTM standards in specifications so that you are buying based on a specific spec so that you know what you're getting, but also to look at the true cost of ownership over the life of that project or that rehabilitation. A good example might be, and I'm not bashing anything here, but let's take a look at, manhole rehabilitation. Cementitious versus some of these other types of lining materials that, okay, if I buy purely on price, 10, 15 years from now, I may have to come back and do that over again. Whereas if I chose one of those other linings, yes, it was more expensive to get that done initially. But if it's got a 40 to 50-year lifespan, if I do the calculations over the cost of the life of 50 years, which one really was the better bargain? When I think about the time and the effort, and I know it costs money to put together bid specs. If you can't do it yourself within house, and time is money, hiring a consulting engineer to put out those, RFPs or those requests for quotes, bid specs. What are your thoughts on that as an engineer when you've advised someone how to make the selection for your community, the best selection for your community?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I 100% agree with you. So life cycle costing. Life cycle costing is such a critical element. You might spend a little bit more upfront, but over the life cycle of that asset, you're going to save a lot more money, right?
Oh,
If
yeah.
you spread that out, you could put something in cheap and then you'd have to replace it in, so many years and continually replace it, right? You put something a little bit more costly, it's going to last a lot longer. And so that whole concept of life cycle costing is something that we really try to impart, because a lot of times, unfortunately, these government agencies, these municipalities, right, they have a certain budget and they're like, we got to do as much as we can with that budget and let's do it as cheaply as possible. And that's how we're going to do it. And then we can say, look at how much we got done. But then you leave it to the next group that's going to have to deal with, the ramifications of that, those efforts back then. And so I really am a firm believer in life cycle costs. I think you have to look at, what am I going to spend now? And then over the life of that 50-year life of that asset. But, we're starting to get to that. It's not 50 years now, it's 75 to 100 years, right? Now we're saying, let's design it. We design everything as engineers for 50 years, but what about 100 years? What can we do that? Where are we at? But the technology is changing. The technology is, and I shouldn't say changing in the sense of, I think the technology is improving is what's happened, right? We're
Right.
becoming, we're learning a lot more. And what you said about the standards, such as ASTM and other standards that are out there, I mean, that's important. I mean, that we follow those testing standards to make sure that when those technologies are utilized or they were adopted, that they were adopted correctly by the contractor, the applicator.
Well, there was something you mentioned in the last episode about having this toolbox or this basket of all these different things. And I'd like you to restate that again, because I thought that was fantastic about, how you're weeding that out and whittling it down. And then how do you, because you are a professor, how do you tell your students to do due diligence? How should you be performing your due diligence when you finally get it down? I call it to that short list of, oh, well, it could be this and it could be this. What's next? How do you get to that final candidate, so to speak?
Well, and when I talked about a toolbox is that, with Trenchless Technologies, it's a family of methods and materials, right?
Right.
That available as I mentioned earlier, to install new or rehabilitate or repair existing underground infrastructure like water and sewer and other infrastructure. And so instead of like trying to figure out which one technology or approach that we should use, I like this toolbox, this basket approach, where you put all the technologies in a basket, and then you start looking at the characteristics of the particular project at hand. What kind of soil conditions? Well, now you might, remove some. Is it a new installation? Is it a rehabilitation or repair? Well, now you're removing, certain technologies. What's the diameter? Okay, well, this can't handle that diameter, so we move that. And so at the end of the day, you're left with a couple of technologies. And so now, as an engineer, you have to look at that and say, okay, I've got a few options now that are viable options. Any of them can be used. And so now I have to look at that and figure out, which is the one that I want to utilize on my project. And sometimes, they'll say, well, we'll give it up to let the contractor make that decision, right? They'll say, you can either use this method or that method, right? And it's up to you to make that method, because we know that they're all viable methods that we've come down to. As long as you follow the standards that are written in the specifications, then that can be, an option. The other thing I always tell people is to ask a lot of people, right? Go and ask contractors, hey, what do you think? Do you think this is viable? I do that all the time, right? I
Really?
mean, I talk to the industry. If I'm not sure about something, I'll call them up and I'll say, hey, what do you think? Does this make sense? And they'll say, oh, I remember on a project we tried this and it didn't work, or this is how we overcame the challenge that we had. I mean, the one thing about the trenches technology industry, it is like a family. We know
They are.
everybody, right? We do know everybody in this industry, and you know what? People are willing to help because we're all in it to promote the technology, right? Nobody wants the competitor to fail, because a failure of a competitor can really impede the adoption of trenches technologies the next time around, right? And so that's why everybody wants everyone to be successful in the industry, and that's where the sharing of knowledge is really critical.
I really like that. It's that we want our brethren in the space to do well, because we want this technology to be adopted more and more and more across the board. And so, where do you see the market heading? What are the types of methodologies do you see coming down the pike, or that the industry as a whole, I would say the asset users, what are the pain points? What are they asking for that we need to answer the call?
Well, I mean, so what are they asking for? Well, they're asking for cheap solutions, right? To be able to, I mean, that's the bottom line. Can we do it?
Right. Of course they are.
To do that? Of course. I mean, that's the number one thing, right? I mean, things are price sensitive in anything, right? When you're looking at it, because they do have, limited budgets. Their capital improvement budgets are getting dwindled down. They're not keeping pace with what's required. So that funding gap is getting further and further apart in terms of what they need and what they have available. And so I think that that's where the challenge for the industry is, to try to get these technologies to a point where, hey, these are very economically feasible, viable technologies. And they are, if you look at the overall costs, right? I mean, the fact that with an open cut, you're cutting the road open and you have to repave it and do all those types of things, and the timing wise, trenchless, you don't have that. So you've got to look at the overall costs, not just the actual construction costs, but what are the intrinsic costs of, repairing the landscape, redoing the sidewalk because it was cut open, or the front yard, or the trees that had to be disrupted, right? Those are costs of one technology, or using an open cut, that are potentially there. You're not going to have that with trenchless. Any trenchless method, it's not going to have that type of issue to deal with. And so with that, I think that, my world that I work in most is in horizontal directional drilling. And, you're seeing now, I was recently on a project that I visited in Shenzhen, China, and they used 100% electric drill rig. So you're going to start to see that, and you're going to see that here more in North America. I think you're going to see electric rigs that'll be out there. And, if you have electric rig, who knows in the future, maybe we're going to have hydrogen powered rigs or equipment in our industry. Right. I mean, that's quite viable in the future. And I think that companies are working on that, potential technology, just like the car manufacturers are talking about hydrogen cars. That certainly is something that we may end up seeing with our equipment, with this environment of, environmental sensitivities, right?
Right.
And so that is something that we might look at seeing in the future. But certainly the more people, the more contractors, the more stakeholders that are in the industry, it's just getting better and better. right?
And
Because
the
they're
industry, you were saying the industry is growing. It's a huge market. You're seeing this around the world. So just throwing this out there because we are trying to bring new people into the industry. And as a professor, I want to leave on this note. What would you encourage peers in the industry as a teacher, from a teacher's perspective, to share with students trying to select a career path about the benefits of this industry as a career path and the avenues available, even if you decide that you're not going to go to college?
well, I think 100%, introduce it in your curriculum, right? There's not a degree in Trenchless technologies, but I introduce Trenchless technologies in my class, my senior level class. So every kid who comes through the construction program, construction engineering or construction management, they actually get like at least one lecture that gives them a taste of what's out there. I also teach an undergraduate and graduate level course on trenchless construction methods. And so we go over all the methods at a 30,000 foot level. We take them on field trips, to see the technology in action. And I bring in some of my friends in the industry who come and give lectures. And I think that's that minimally that as an academic, you should do that. And if you don't have the knowledge of trenchless, there's plenty of people out there in your region, and they'd be more than happy to come in and give a talk in your class about trenchless technologies. And so have that out there. So not every kid is going to go in that area, but at least they can, learn about it and have that kind of that background and understand what it is. And that's one of the things that, I offer here. And then there's a few other schools that do that around the country. And I think that's really, really how we're going to get at that you have to hit people at the grassroots level. Right?
And when they're young too, in the high schools, maybe even junior high, because nobody ever thinks about, oh, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's interesting that when you expose these young people to some of the things that we do that is very high tech, they're like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. Like take CCTV as an example. That's like they see that as, oh, wow, that's like I get to play video games and play with a robot all day. Wow, isn't that cool? And I may not have to go to college for that. I can do that through on-the-job training. I think we talked about, there's so many great careers in this industry.
There are many careers. And, one of the things that just is mind-boggling to me is that every child, it doesn't matter, every single child, as they're growing up, they go through a stage where they're building things, right? They have building blocks, they have Legos, they have all kinds of things. They're constructing, they're doing construction. But then all of a sudden it stops and they no longer do that. And they're looking at other things that of interest and that sort of thing. And so I always find that interesting that, we have them when they're like toddlers, but then there's this period where we lose them in that. But I think that realistically getting people, whether they're going to come into, join the trades, which is an amazing career. I mean, the people in the trades, I have a lot of respect for them. I mean, they're just really special people, and they're the ones that really build America, right? I mean, it's the trades. Or they go to college and get a degree in civil engineering or construction engineering or construction management, and then be the project managers or project engineers or superintendents on the job site. You got to get them at, I think, the junior school level, right? That's where you kind of get them, because sometimes, when you get to high school, it tends to be a little late. They've already decided what they want to do and that. And it's really funny the impact of television. And I've always said this to our industry is that if you talk to a lot of people, they say, oh, I want to be an architect, because look at how architects are portrayed on TV, right? Architects are portrayed as living in these huge mansions, driving fancy cars, and working in these big offices. But I have a lot of friends who are architects, and I'll tell you, that's certainly not, it's a great profession, but it's not as sensationalized as they do on TV. You imagine having a show talking about a construction, engineer or construction manager in the same role. You might have more kids going, hey, I want to be in construction. and that. And so I remember I'll tell you a funny story. I remember, I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago, I was asking a kid, 12 or 13-year-old kid, I said, what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? And his answer was, I want to be a CSI. Because that's when CSI was
Because
really
of the
popular. And they watch it on TV and they see, guys pulling up in Hummers and that sensationalization of the career and that. And so it really, the media has a big impact. And I know that, from this industry, from the construction industry, from my school here at ASU, our plan is to ramp up our social media platform. I mean, we really have to do that. I mean, that's how you're going to attract interest in the program. You're going to have interest in the industry. I know many of the associations that I'm involved with, they've really gone out and, put videos together, do things on YouTube and different, media to really get people to look at this industry as, what it really is. It's an exciting industry. Whether you're trenchless or you're just construction as a whole, they're both, great opportunities for careers.
Oh, yeah. And even, wastewater treatment, all the things that are interrelated to these utilities and what we do in the field that we're in is that it's a great time to be alive. There's opportunities. It's recession proof because as long as there's people, we're going to need water and a way to get rid of our waste. And, it's just great living wage. And it's a way to give back to your community. You really are being of service to your community, if that's something that speaks, to your heart as to where you want to go. And so with that, Dr. Sam, thank you. Thank you for, having this great conversation and the things we talked about. I hope sometime I'll be able to bring you back on and maybe you can talk about an interesting project that you've been involved with that people might want to hear about. And so again, my thanks. And for those of you tuning in, thank you for sharing your time today with us. And until next time, keep it flowing.
Be sure to subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you're an industry expert and would like to be considered as a guest on the show, click the Be a Podcast guest link below in the show notes for more information. Thanks again for joining me, the DooDoo Diva, on this week's episode of the Smells Like Money podcast.